I'm very pleased to welcome you in the name of the RECI Working Group Education in Emergencies. The working group Education in Emergencies is one of RECI's 3 working groups. We have established our group in the beginning of this year. So for our working group, it's the first workshop that we are organizing. Working with traumatized children in education is a crucial topic for us, and it will help us shaping the profile of our working group. It is important and a fundamental right of children to ensure education, also in emergency situations, such as for children and teenagers who fled war and violence. They usually have made difficult and painful experiences that impact their learning and social behavior. How can we detect if a certain behavior of a student is caused by a trauma? How can we apply trauma-informed practices in our educational work? We are very grateful to Kostas Achile that he will bring light into these important and challenging questions. Kostas is the project coordinator in Greece of the project Children of Refugees in Education, short CORE. CORE is a project of Zürich University of Teacher Education, and it aims to promote the life skills and transversal competences of young refugees, particularly in transit countries such as Greece. We are also active in Lebanon, besides Greece, and maybe soon also in Italy. Kostas Achille holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the University of Westminster in London and a Master's in Cultural Anthropology as well as in Educational Psychology from the Catholic University in Leuven and the Neapolis University Paphos in Cyprus. He has worked in various programs and NGOs providing psychosocial support to children and young adults and in assisting young traumatized refugees to encourage greater social inclusion. Thank you very much, Kostas, for providing us insights into the very important topic of education of traumatized children.
Should I take over? Is there anything else that you would
Yes,
like?
you can. No. Thank you.
Great.
The floor is yours. You can. We are looking forward to your
Amazing.
presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Samir, for this great introduction. Before I go on to the presentation and talk a little bit about the objectives of what we're going to do, I just want to say to you that in any point that you have any question or something that you didn't understand or something that you would like to add, please use the chat. I will have always, or at least I will try, have my mind on the questions. And once I finish some points, I will directly address your questions and try to answer as much as possible, having in mind all the time as well. Right. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Can you all see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Amazing. Great. Yeah. Also, as you probably can see on my name, I'm only speak English and Greek. So if you write a question in French or another language, I might not be able to understand. Sorry for that. But my colleagues will help. Okay, so the objectives for the learning objectives for today is to get a broader understanding of what is mental trauma and also what is toxic stress, to be able to recognize some of the effects of trauma on students, on young individuals, and then at the end, how you can apply trauma-informed practices in your daily work. If you're working with people, either if you're teachers or social workers and so on, how you can help and support this target group. Okay, so let's go a little bit talking about the definition of trauma. So while I'm using this word throughout the webinar, I will talking about the 3 E's of trauma. So we all experience some level of stress on a regular basis, whether at our work or at home. Daily stressors such as deadlines, meetings, traffic, family needs are common for most of us. And also we face more intense experiences like illness, caring for an aging parent, ongoing stress at work, financial issues, now COVID-19. And also, in addition to that, even positive experiences like getting married, getting a new job, moving to another house can cause some level of strain. In most of the cases, or in many cases, we have the capacity, we have the ability to cope with a range of life experiences, life events. Some of them might be unexpected, some of them expected, mild or intense. So in this webinar, the term trauma is used to describe an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, overwhelms our ability to cope and manage this situation, and has lasting adverse effects on a person, on our mental, physical, social, and emotional well-being. So an easy way to remember, and something that helps me, is the 3 E's, which, as you can see, is for event. The first E is event, second is experience, and effect. So by events, by traumatic events, if we take the example of a school environment, students may face, students at school may face in their families and communities lots of different stressful incidents, such accidents, natural disaster, loss of a parent, and so on. Some of them might have some of those events might be a single experience, something that starts and ends immediately, or it can have a chronic or even generational duration, for example, such as abuse, neglect, chronic bullying that we see a lot in our schools, exposure to family or community violence, and also the cumulative and historical impact of poverty, racism, or discrimination. However, whether an event or circumstance is traumatic depends on our capacity and our experience of the event. It doesn't mean that if we witness a natural disaster or if we lose a loved one, we will be traumatized. So we cannot say that a particular situation is always traumatic for everyone. So whether this event is experienced as traumatic is influenced by many elements, many factors, including our internal coping resources, the so-called coping mechanisms, our external supports, and broader community. So I'm talking about the support network that each of us may have or may not have, cultural and societal factors, and also how we understand and respond to our experiences. Finally, immediate reactions to traumatic events include, feelings of fear, helplessness, and loss of control, not being able to manage what's going on, our emotions. So this traumatic experience, as I said earlier, might have short and long-term effects on our health and well-being. And especially if we're talking about school-age children and youth, it will have, it might have impact on how they see themselves, we're talking about self-image and how to how to, you know, how they see themselves in the eyes of others as well. And also it has an impact on how like if they can trust people, if they feel safe. So they're challenging the idea of that we're living in a safe world and everything is safe around us. Sorry, just I need to add the chat because I said I will have the chat, but I don't have it. Yeah, great. So now we'll go on and talk a little bit of types of trauma, including traumatic experiences. Some of them I mentioned earlier, but I will go more in depth on that. So traumatic experiences, you know, come in many forms. The ones that you will see today is just an example. There are many that can cause trauma. So some of them ranging from one-time events like hurricanes or you know, fires or floods. It's not that every day we have floods and fires and hurricanes, and to some that are more chronic, have long-term duration. So potentially traumatic experiences for, especially for children and youth in school community can have a huge impact on how they perceive the whole school environment, the whole education. So we have here natural disasters, we have human-caused disasters, accidents, wars, environmental disasters, and so on, community violence, and school violence. Now, if we can categorize them, so if we can categorize them, there's, in my mind, there are like 4 types. Of course, there are others. Is the family trauma. So we're talking about abuse, neglect, especially in the younger ages. That will we will see later that will have a huge impact on the development as well. Refugee and immigrant trauma, where this is the most is the type that I have experienced more through my work. The last 5 years that I'm working with the refugee population. Medical trauma. Here, I mean, because depending on the language that you talking, that you're speaking, trauma might have more physical meaning. Like, for example, if you cut your hand, that might be a trauma. Like in Greek, for example, trauma means wounds as well. But here, when I mention medical trauma, I mean that's the after effects of a serious illness or an injury, either directly or indirectly through another person. And poverty, of course. I've chosen to speak a little bit about complex trauma, meaning that complex trauma describes both exposure to multiple traumatic events from an early age and the immediate and long-term effects of this experience over the course of child development. So, for example, you know, some examples include chronic abuse, family violence, and other forms of violent victimization that children are experiencing from early age without having, without adequate adult support. So without the support networks that we need in order to develop and grow up. This type of trauma is particularly devastating because it occurs during the critical period of brain development. So we're talking about very young ages, from you know, 1 year old until 10 years old. That is, we have a lot of brain development there. So actually, it's the period before the child has the chance to develop strong and positive ways to cope with stress. So we don't have a coping mechanism when we are young. Do you have any questions so far? I see that that's clear. Do not hesitate at any point. Just stop me. Sorry. And finishing off of the types of trauma, I want to speak a little bit about the historical, the racial trauma and historical trauma. So when I'm talking about racial trauma or race-based traumatic stress, it refers to potentially traumatic experiences resulting from direct experiences of racial harassment, including threats of harm, injury, and being humiliated, witnessing racial violence towards others, such as hate crimes or violence by law enforcement. We have multiple examples from the US now. Experiencing discrimination and institutional racism. This include racial microaggressions. So it's that daily verbal or behavioral exchanges that intentionally or unintentionally communicate hostile environment, hostile behavior against us, against, for example, LGBTQ communities, communities of color, and so on. When I'm talking about historical trauma, I mean the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding across generations, including the lifespan which emanates from massive group trauma. Some examples of those communities can be, as I mentioned earlier, communities of color, LGBTQ communities, Holocaust survivors, and now something that is very vivid to our days is the refugee communities. So here, apart from the traumatic experiences, we're talking about the stereotypes as well and the stigmatization that some groups have. Great. So moving forward, here is a brief summary of some responses of the common responses that individuals who are traumatized have. So the main focus on this webinar are the school-age children, so either children or youth. So usually this population may focus on their own actions during the traumatic event and have feelings of guilt or shame, believe that the event that they have experienced is their fault, so they internalizing the experience. They might have some headaches, stomach aches, nightmares, disruptions in their sleep, difficulty on concentrating in school, angry outbursts that as the teachers or facilitators or whatever, we might not be able to manage and analyze, like why this came up, this behavior. In the youth population, may over or under react to situation or experiences in their environment, such as sudden movements, loud noises, physical contact, or interaction with peers or adults. And also something, something that we will definitely see in school is the poor school performance, like the student not being able to concentrate or focus on the lesson, on the educational material that is given, because their mind is preoccupied with other things. Before we move to toxic stress, where I have a very explanatory video, that means that I will not talk anymore. I will speak a little bit about the impact that that trauma can have on students. Of course, those are some indicators. That doesn't mean that that's a fact. You know, they might have difficulty paying attention and learning, more time out of the classroom, increased isolation, school absences, more suspensions or expulsions, high referral rates to special education. Some teachers might think that, you know, those children might have learning difficulties because they cannot understand the whole what's going on. Poor test scores and increased risk of failing grades. Okay, sorry, slides. Okay, so I will play a video now, which is very explanatory of what is toxic stress. Is it better?
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the
Sorry, guys.
stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress,
I didn't.
the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
Great. I hope now was, yeah, great. Okay, so this video just very simple explained, you know, the term toxic stress, which actually puts the young individual, the child, the brain, our brain's alarm system to be on all the time, and that has huge impact of tasks like, you know, reasoning and learning. So the neurons that usually are developing has a decreased performance, decreased level of connection, neural connections, and so on. And this is happening because the children are not in an environment, a nurture environment. They're not in a safe environment. So they're always, their body and their brain always feel a risk. It's like a car that has that annoying alarm sound that whenever someone passes or whenever someone touches it goes on. It's similar to that. Might not be a great example, but yeah. So now I will go on. If you don't have any questions, I see the chat. I don't have any questions. Yeah, I will go on and talking a little bit about the possible triggers. And what I mean by triggers is triggers are reminders of past traumatic experiences that automatically cause the body to react as if as if this traumatic event is happening again in the moment. So trauma reminders include sights, sounds, smells, feelings, or situations related to a previous traumatic event. Just to give you an example of my working experience, once I started working with this population in summer of 2016. So actually it was like a year when the massive population started coming into Europe through Greece in 2015. So I was working in a camp. I was providing psychosocial support to children and teenagers. And we were doing, actually we're playing football. So we're doing a sports activity. And here in Greece, when we have our national days, which usually we have one in October and one in March, we have these F-16 army planes. I don't know if that's, yeah, demonstrating, let's say, the army force that we have. So they float directly on top of the camp. So if you have ever experienced being on like below those F-16 planes, you'll see, you might know, like, that is a huge sound that you cannot, it's like, you know, your whole house is breaking down. So all the children that were in the activity, they just started running, going to their tents, started crying, and didn't know. They thought that because that was the sound that was going on in because most of them were Syrian refugees in the war. So once they've heard that noise, they thought that something is happening. So this traumatic experience came back to life, and they were panicking. So it took us almost 2 hours to try to relax them, explain to them, even though it will be very difficult to children, like why this is happening. That is not a war zone or something. It's just a demonstration, stupid demonstration that we have here. So moving forward. So yeah, it's, as I said, like when faced with trauma reminders, with those triggers, our emotional brain assumes that the danger is real. So we're not able to differentiate and say, okay, this is not really happening. This is not the really threat. So so this allows us to move quickly into action, which can be critical to our survival, or in some circumstances, like crying, hiding, trying to find an adult to help us. So now I will show you some examples of those triggers. So as I said, loud noises, just as the example that I mentioned earlier. Physical touch, with physical touch, for example, with a population that I'm working with, always is a challenge. And a tip that I'm giving to anybody who now enters to that field is try to avoid as much as possible the physical touch, because, you know, first of all, might be cultural element, but at the same time might cause this trauma trigger as well. Threatening gestures, authority figures, and limit setting chaos or uncertainty, particular spaces such as bathroom, closed areas that are less monitored, changes in routine, hand or body gestures perceived as threatening, witnessing violence between others, such as peers fighting, emergency vehicles and police or fire personnel, certain spells, weather, and sometimes particular time of the year that might work as a reminder of when an incident happened. So here I wanted to add that I'm not sure if you're aware of the camp situation, like how the refugees are here in Greece. most of them, apart from the experience that they have, the trip, the wars, and so on, they experiencing in daily basis violent incidents. So this makes even worse, the trauma that some people might have. So they're supposed to be in a safe place, but on the contrary, they are always risk on violent incidents. So the common responses to stress is probably it as the fight or flight mechanism that we've seen in the video as well. So our brain has this defense mechanism to either fight the experience that we're getting at the moment. That means that can translate it in behaviors such as yelling, swearing, posturing, aggressive behavior. Flight responses, that means that to get away of that threat can be running away, refusing to talk, avoidance, substance use, and also we have the third response that can be the freeze response, spacing out, appearing numb, disconnected from reality, confused and unresponsive. So those are some behaviors that I've seen a lot working, especially with the youth, like teenagers. That once I started working, I wasn't very familiar with traumatized population. It was hard to me to understand and to take a step back and see the bigger picture, because I was seeing a lot of anger to most of the participants that I have in the project, and also on the other side, people who were disconnected of what's going on, not without any motivation of moving forward and improving their life. Okay, so enough from me talking. So I have one small game that will lead to a discussion for you called Roll the Dice. Unfortunately, because now we are in an online setting, I will not be able, so here are the dices. So usually how it works is you are divided in groups. I pass by, I roll the dices, and each dice has some elements of a profile, of a student profile. So you in your groups, you have to discuss together what are the possible needs of that person, of that child, and how, based on the challenges and the context that you have, how you can support further based on either your working experience or what you've heard and what you think. So because I cannot roll the dice for everybody and will take so much time to jump in each breakout room, you all have the slides on the Google document. So for example, whoever is in group 1, so if you go in the breakout room, it says what group are you in. So group 1 will have the 12-year-old girl from a rural area without any prior education. Group 2 will have the 12-year-old boy from a small town with depression. So every group will have one of those profiles. So we will give you around 10 to 15 minutes to discuss and come up with some answers, like what are the needs and how you can help. So what I'm going to talk now is some trauma-informed practices that you can use in your workplace, either as a school environment, community center, or wherever you working with this target group. So I categorize them to 6 tips that I'm trying to apply and implement in my daily work. The first one is listen. So try to relate and empathize, observe, and at the same time observe your students. That means that that it's very important, and something that helps me a lot is to observe. So you can step back and see how the people are reacting. Stop and think rather than jumping to the conclusion that, for example, she's a problem or he's a problem. Ask yourself, what happened to this child and why she or he behaving this way. So it's very important not to judge by the cover, not to judge, not to leave behind a little bit your first reaction to behavior. Build a relationship. You already mentioned that some of you, in some groups. You already know, how important it is to have good relationship with with your students or with people in general. But for children who have been affected by trauma, strong connections are vital. So we're talking about rich relationships with teachers or people who support and help children to form a kind of resilience. Create. You play, a critical role in making, your students, let's say, or the people that we're working with, to feel welcome in the classroom. Is the sense of belonging. So students have to feel secure and connected both to adults and to peers in order to learn. When I see anything negative beginning to happen, like someone is bullying someone else, I stop it and I have a conversation with the child. So reminding them, that is not good. That's not okay to happen. And then is adapt. So you have to be flexible. You have to adapt your material, adapt your ways of working to the needs of the student. And finishing, for me, it's very important to have a routine. So routine is something that you will start a lesson, you will start an activity with, and then you'll have something that will be co-created with the group. It can be a dance, it can be a song, it can be clapping, it can be anything. It can be just a gesture that you start and close an activity. So that will help the group to feel as a team, as that they are together. I'm a little bit concerned of the time, but I will make it. So now I have, as I said earlier, if you have any questions, just drop them on the chat. Now you opened it. So now I will present some tips of how you can create a safe space. What I mean by safe space is not necessarily a physical place, like build a house or build a, something that is safe. Of course, that might be an element, but it's mostly the emotions and the vibes that will be either in a classroom, in a sports center, or wherever you are working. So some tips that I have here is, in order to have a safe space, it needs to be inclusive. With that, I mean that everybody, it's good to feel that they are part of the game, that are part of the group, that we're working as one, and it's not that we pay attention to to differences and to challenges that everybody has. To be non-judgmental, that's very crucial. Not having people making fun of others. In that way, everybody in his or her own speed and way will be able, whenever they want it, to express themselves and contribute to the team goal or to the group. Creative. I've read earlier, I can't remember which group, but you mentioned find different, I think was that the one that I wasn't able to read. to find different ways, more art-based ways to support the child, like sports, theater, drama, painting, music, dancing. Those are, you need to be creative and you need to find different ways to support a person. To be expressive, freedom of expression, to be affectionate, you know, to have the feeling that you know, like there are positive vibes going on. Very important is to be fun and relaxed. For example, we all know for our experience, or at least this was my experience, like, you know, going into school sometimes can be boring, would not have a lot of fun and a lot of relaxation, especially when we going to higher grades. So, but it's always important when we're learning, even now that we are adults, whatever we learn, it's good to be fun and to, not all the time, but to be times that will be fun and pleasant and relaxed. And the last point that I have is about boundaries. That there are 3 types of boundaries that I will mention. Is first of all, the boundaries that you will have, you and the group that you're working with. It's good to set some boundaries from the beginning, so the group will understand, you know, what is acceptable and what is not, what you as an individual wants or not, or doesn't want to happen or to do. Here I'm talking as well, because with my experience, through my experience, especially with youth, when we were doing some projects, they had the tendency and eagerness, like to get to know me more, like ask my Facebook profile, you know, all those personal information, mainly because, you know, they want to have to make a new friend. They want to get to know me better. But sometimes it needs to have, you need to set some boundaries in order to support someone to do work, let's say, and that will help the learning. Then the second layer is the boundaries between the class. That here I'm talking mostly about respect to each other. That not everything is acceptable. Wherever we are, we have a set of rules. I hate the word rules, but you know, we have some guidelines that everybody has to respect it, or at least follow it, in order to have a friendly and proper safe space, let's say, and learning environment. Where's the time? I think I'm good. Okay. So this is the last activity that you will do in groups. So before you go into groups and start thinking, I want to mention that something that apart from whatever we said today, a very important part of working with this population is to take care of yourself. Like, to, after a hard job or a hard day or a stressful day, you need to take care of yourself in order to be productive and in order to have the capacity to support your beneficiaries, let's say. So what I want you to do now is to consider those 3 questions. The first one is, I want you, maybe it might help you to close your eyes and think a little bit about your safe space. So whenever you're stressed, what is the place, or the mental place or physical place that you're going? Try to think and feel how does that, what emotions you have when you're there. And the last question is, what strategies do you have for self-care when you're stressed, when you're tired, when you're overwhelmed, work, personal reasons, and so on. Perfect. That's I mean, that's great that we are, you know, different people, different minds here, because you can see that whatever someone says to you about strategies it needs to suit your interests and your needs. For example, I used to, when I'm stressed, I, you know, go for a walk with my dog, listen to music, and I run, because when I'm running, my mind, you know, gets blocked, and I'm just going and going, and it's like a therapy for me. Great, thank you very much. Yes, great. Okay, so something like a motto that you can take you know, out of the whole presentation is that you cannot have a positive life and a negative mind. For some people, this might be, you know, very theoretical, but it's something that, you know, it's a food for thought, let's say. So here I have citations that I used, so you can go through them if you have time, find more. I totally recommend to see the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. It's a US network that's specialized on child traumatic stress. You'll find more information. So it's very clear, you don't need to have any previous knowledge. And also one recommendation, if you're interested in the topic, is to read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Is a very informative book about trauma and his work as well. So I totally recommend it. You can find it everywhere, and you can start reading it. So that was what I wanted to talk with you today. Thank you very much. I will give the spits now to Beatrice. No, Samir.
Yes, thanks a lot, Kostas, for these valuable insights. I now understand better how traumas impact students and their behaviors, and also thanks for the practical advice to you and to everybody else how to possibilities how to deal with traumas. Thanks to everybody for attending this workshop. We really appreciated your presence, your inputs, your thoughts. And I think we still have some time for questions or reactions from your side, feedbacks. You can write it into the chat, and then we will gather it and go through it, and if there are open questions, also discuss them in the last 5 minutes.
So Isabel asks if we can use a community culture, for example, songs, maybe some traditional dances, for example, to deal with trauma. So, and what I'm thinking about art therapy. So in the previous organization that I was working, where I met Lerato as well, this is one of the participants here, I was leading a youth project where we were running art-based activities, which, for example, we've run drama, theater, filmmaking, dance courses, singing courses. And also we have some, we have art therapists in the team. I strongly believe that it's very important of whatever intervention you decide to do to consult and also get to learn the culture of the people, because it's very important to connect whatever you do with their culture, with what they represent, because it's their identity. And if they see that you appreciate their cultural identity and their ways of living, and you want to learn, then I'm 100% sure that the bonds that you will build will be very strong, and then you'll be able to do better job. So art therapy for me is, and also in my educational interests, I'm thinking to follow art therapist courses, because I think it's very crucial and very beneficial, especially when you're working with population that you don't speak their native language, because some challenges are that as well. That unfortunately, if we want to do more therapeutic interventions like psychotherapy and stuff like that, it's very difficult to do it through an interpreter or if you don't speak the direct language. So I think art-based activities are very crucial because people can express with different languages. It's not only the verbal language, it's there are plenty of others.
I see that Valeria also had a questions, but may I ask a follow-up question on this one, because we briefly touched on it before when we were discussing it in a small group concerning community culture, religion, and many of the refugees come from societies where religion has quite an important role. Can you use religion in a way as a safe space, and do you use it? Do you do that in
religion
support? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, for me, religion is when I talked about the cultural elements. Religion is part of some people cultures, so whatever they bring out, I'm trying to be always flexible, and whatever they give me, either it can be even like a traditional song or part of religion, because for some people that are religious, that affects their behavior and the day-to-day how they manage some situations. And of course, it's very important to know the religion context, and also to respect the religion elements when you're working with in general with different people, because you never know how that might have an impact, and also it might be an element that might broke the bonds if you think that religion is not important. Or because personally I might say that I don't believe in anything, but that doesn't mean that everybody should do that, and I will not respect others' religion views and culture. Yeah.
Okay, maybe Valeria's
Yes.
question, and then I think we can hand over to Beatrice. And
so Valeria asks, what challenges did you face in your work with traumatized children and youth, and how did you address those? Okay, I mean, there are plenty of challenges, especially when you're working with people, not traumatized children. It's it's a lot of things, but the most, like on top of my head, something that troubled me a lot. Apart of the beginning was the language, because in my work, or at least like the tasks that I had to do at the beginning, when I was getting to know the cultures and getting to know the different elements that each people has, language was a big barrier for me. Later on, I developed my skills a little bit on how to communicate with different ways. That's why now I'm interested in projects that not necessarily need verbal communication. And you can do amazing things without necessarily speaking the same language. Another challenge was something that I was discussing with Beatrice, Samir, and Nadine earlier, is about boundaries. Because usually, especially when I'm working with youth, the age difference, our age difference is not so big. And sometimes they try to see me as, as their big brother, as a friend, and that has an impact on my work and and the support. So one thing that it took me almost, a couple of years to finalize, like what, the way that I would like to set boundaries and at the same time not offend the person that I'm working with, was really challenging. because then it's a matter of, you know, building a relationship, but building boundaried relationship with a lot of elements, respect, mutual respect, and mutual understanding of what things I can accept as Kostas and what things are acceptable for the other. Yeah. Also, especially when the last thing that I would say, especially when I was the drama project that I said, because by nature it has a lot of expression, a lot of maybe sometimes some memories might evoke. The difficult part for me was when people wanted to express themselves and wanted to share their traumatic experiences, let's say. So the difficult part was how I can take that, so empathy, but at the same time how I can protect the rest of the group for the triggers, like the triggering experiences that I mentioned. So I came up with some stressful situations of how to deal with that, how to first of all not stop and not offend the person I would like to serve, but at the same time do it in a boundaried way. So that was something that I'm still experiencing it, and every time I found different ways depending on the group and depending on what I'm doing to deal with it. So it's to be flexible, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kostas, again for also to answering these questions. If you have any further feedback or
Yes.
questions, you know our addresses. We are happy to provide you with further information or with answers. So, and maybe Beatrice, would you like to conclude the session?
Yes, thank you very much. Really, really inspiring presentation and discussions, thought triggering. I think there is so many things I certainly will continue to think about, and I hope it has inspired you too to take up this new knowledge or also ideas, experience that you were able to share in the groups. For me, it was striking. I think one thing that I learned today, which is important, is that trauma is a gradual phenomenon. And I'm sure probably in psychology, there are probably indicators on at what point to actually talk about trauma that is a lasting trauma. But we talked about that as well, that we all have little traumatizing experiences in our lives. It's normal, and how do we deal with it? And in a way, when we talked about the approaches on how to work with traumatized children in education, all of the things that Kostas mentioned and that were also discussed in the groups are indicators for a good teacher who is working with a child-centered approach. Whether it is a group of children with augmented trauma or not, these are all indicators of, that are important in teaching when you take a really child-centered approach. And obviously, if you're working with children who have severe trauma, it is all the more important to really, really be good on these approaches. So I thought that was interesting, and it will also be interesting to see whether the working group Education in Emergencies and the working group Teacher Training for Quality Education, we have these thematic working groups in RECI, can take up this discussion among themselves, or between each other as well. I think that might be really interesting. Thank you so much for the working group Education in Emergencies for hosting this meeting. Thank you, obviously, to Kostas for the really excellent preparations and presentations and
My pleasure.
discussions. And I would just like to also share information that we are planning our third OROS, the next online RECI Open Space webinar on the 24th of June. And it is organized by our member organization Right to Play, and the topic will be play-based learning. We don't know more yet. And we're still starting to work on the concept, but that's what we're looking forward to. And I would like to thank all the participants for being here and sharing your experience and your questions. And again, the working group Education Emergencies and Kostas especially. Thanks so much. Great work.